Hello, welcome back to the series of AWS training sessions. This is Sridhar Anchuri. So in the last session we discussed about the concepts of VPC and subnets. So VPC is the virtual private network within AWS environment, and the VPC is associated to a region. So now we created a VPC within North Virginia region, and within VPC we can have one or more subnets. So the one important thing we need to remember is, like, for VPC we have to specify the IPv4 CADR block range, and this is what we did yesterday. And within this VPC we can have one or more subnets, but the CADR range of the subnets should be within the VPC range. So this is what we did yesterday, and we are going to get into details of the networking resources within AWS environment. So, so yesterday we created the two subnets. I'm going to filter it by VPC, and here I have two subnets, the subnet 1 and subnet 2. So instead of having the names as like subnet 1 and subnet 2, I'm going to change the name. So I'm going to name this as like public subnet, and I'm going to name this as private subnet. So there are two types. One is the public subnet and one is the private subnet. And what is the difference between these two? So public subnet is going to have an internet gateway attached to the subnet. We are going to look into the internet gateway little later, but for a subnet, if we have the internet gateway attached, the subnet is going to be like a public subnet. So whatever the resources we create within the public subnet, the resources can be connected to the internet. So in a subnet, like, if we want to create the resources, and if we want those resources to communicate to the outside world, then we have to make it a public subnet. Only if we want the resources to be communicated to the internet, then we are going to go with this public subnet. Otherwise we are going to go with the private subnet. So whatever the resources we have within the private subnet, those subnets are not accessible from the internet. So we cannot connect to the resources within the public subnet, within the private subnet directly. We can only connect to the resources within the public subnet from the internet. So how do we create an internet gateway, and how to attach the internet gateway to the subnet? We are going to look into it now. So now we have one private subnet and one public subnet. So we are going to have the internet gateway attached to only the public subnet, and this one is not going to have the internet gateway attached, because we want this subnet to be more secure. We want to have only the private instances within this subnet. So now this is the public subnet. I named it as a public subnet, but this is not public yet because the internet gateway is not created yet. So first thing, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an internet gateway. And to create an internet gateway, I can just go to the internet gateways here, and there's no internet gateway attached to this VPC, because now we are filtering it out by VPC. And if I remove this filter, we see that there is an internet gateway, but this internet gateway is attached to the default VPC. So to our VPC, we also created a new VPC, and to that newly created VPC, we don't have the internet gateway attached. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new internet gateway, create internet gateway, and the name tag is, I'm going to say it as like my internet gateway, and create. So now the internet gateway has been created. So with this internet gateway, the traffic can be routed onto the public internet. So VPC traffic can be routed onto the internet by using this internet gateway. So I have the internet gateway now. But here if we see the state, the internet gateway is detached, because we just created internet gateway, but we did not attach this to the VPC. So to attach the internet gateway to the VPC, we can just select the internet gateway and click this button, attach to VPC. So internet gateway should always be attached to the VPC. So after selecting the VPC, just click attach. So now the internet gateway is attached to the VPC. So internet gateway is attached to the VPC, not to the subnet. But we have to explicitly say that the traffic from that subnet should be routed through the internet gateway. So we have to add the routing rules. So now what we did is we have the VPC, we have two subnets, we named it as like private subnet and public subnet, and we created an internet gateway. And this internet gateway is attached to the VPC because internet gateway cannot be attached to subnet. Internet gateway has to be attached to the VPC. So now because we already have the internet gateway and it is already attached to the VPC, still we cannot route the traffic. The traffic is currently not routed out from the public subnet to internet. The traffic routing between subnet and the internet, that has to be created. So for routing the traffic between the VPC or between the subnet to the internet, that routing has to be done from the routing tables. So now we looked into the VPC, we looked into the subnets, and we created an internet gateway. And the next thing is we have to add the routing rules. See, like I'm going to the subnets, and here I'm going to filter out by the VPC, and these are the two subnets. So I'm just selecting the public subnet, and if I go down here, so I can see the summary of the subnet. This is the subnet ID, and this is the CIDR range, CIDR, IPv4 CIDR, and the state is available, and this is associated to this VPC. And in addition to this, this subnet is associated or within the availability zone A, and there are some routing table. There is a routing table attached to each subnet. So to get the details of the routing table, we can see this. We can go to the routing. So routing table, if we go to the routing table, this is where we can see how the traffic is being routed from the VPC. So here what we are saying is the traffic within the subnet, the traffic can be routed only within this destination. So this is the CIDR of the VPC. So what this means is currently whatever the resources we create within subnet, whatever the resources we create in public subnet, this traffic can only be routed within the VPC. Means this subnet is not public yet because the traffic is not going to go to the outside internet. So if we want to add the routing rules, now though we added a internet gateway, we are still, the subnet is not going to route the traffic through the internet gateway to outside world. So if we want to route the traffic from VPC to the outside internet, we have to add a new routing entry saying that all the traffic should be routed to the public internet by using internet gateway. So that routing rule we need to add. And in order to add the routing rules, so what we can do is for each subnet there's going to be a routing table. And now whenever we created the VPC, a routing table has been created, the default routing table, and within the default routing table the traffic within the VPC is been routed. This entry is already existing. So now instead of using this routing table, because this routing table doesn't have the internet gateway, so instead of using this routing table, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new routing table. So with this routing table, what I should do is I have to let the system know that the VPC or the public subnet traffic should be routed through the internet through internet gateway. So in order to create a new routing table, I'm going to create a new routing table, and here I'm going to say as like public routing, and I'm going to create this routing table as part of this VPC. So this routing table is going to be within this VPC. Just click S. So now the new routing table is been created. Okay, now we got this routing table, and if we go to the routing rules, so by default whenever we create a routing table, the default route is being added. So what the default route means, what does this mean is the traffic within the VPC, this is the CIDR of the VPC. So the traffic within this VPC is routed within the resources within the VPC, but The traffic is not going to be routed outside. So now what we should do is we have to add a new routing entry to route the traffic through internet gateway to public internet. So in order to add the routing entry, I just need to click edit button, edit, and add new routing. So add new route. So now destination is we are going to add the routing to access the public internet. From anywhere in the world we must be able to access these systems through internet gateway. So anywhere in the world means for the as part of destination we have to specify as 0.0.0.0 by 0. This means everywhere. So now from everywhere from anywhere in the world we can connect to the resources within this public subnet. And how the traffic should be routed from within VPC, how should the traffic be routed onto the public internet? That is by using internet gateway, because we already created internet gateway, and here we have to specify the target as internet gateway. So when I just click here, the internet gateway is shown here. So I'm just going to select the internet gateway and save. So now we created a new routing table, and in this routing table we added a new routing entry, and with this routing entry the traffic will be routed to the this destination, that is through public internet using internet gateway. This is the public routing table. So next step is what we should do is we have to attach this routing table to our public subnet, because this is the public routing. The other routing, the other default routing which we have is doesn't have the internet gateway. So this is the one which is going to route the traffic through internet gateway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to the subnets and selecting the public subnet here, public subnet, and here in this public subnet we have to change the routing table to the newly created routing table instead of using the default routing table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click edit, and here I'm going to change the routing table to the one which we created and save. So now the routing is been updated. So now you can see the difference between these two public and private subnets. So if I select the public subnet and if I go to the routing table, the traffic will be routed through this internet gateway to this destination. So whatever the resources we create within this public subnet can talk to the internet by using this internet gateway. But if we go to the private subnet, for the private subnet we did not change any routings. So there is a default routing table which was created, and as part of default routing this entry was already been there. Meaning, like whenever we create a VPC and whenever we create the subnets, so all the resources within the subnets within that VPC can talk to each other, because the routing is already been or added by default, and this routing cannot be deleted. So in a VPC, how many ever the subnets we have and whatever the resources we have in those subnets, all these resources within a single VPC can talk to each other. But only thing is, if you want to connect to the internet or if you want to connect to the different VPC, then we have to modify the routing table. So in our case, this is the private subnet, we are not going to add any routing, and this is the public subnet, and this is where we added the public routing. So this is about adding the routing table. So we created a subnets, we created internet gateway, we created the routing table, and we updated the subnet to use the newly created routing table. And the next step within the subnet is about network ACL. So in the previous sessions we already discussed about the security groups. With the security groups we are going to block the traffic, we are going to block or allow only the required traffic. And security groups is a way to build the firewall. And network ACL is similar to the security group, but network ACL is going to block the traffic at the network level, at the subnet level. So network ACL is either at the subnet or VPC level, but security group is going to block the traffic at the instance level. So whenever any traffic comes from outside to this network, So what happens is the traffic has to flow through this VPC to the instance. So at VPC level, we are going to have this firewall. We are going to have this security implemented here. And if this security rule allows the traffic, then before even connecting to the instance, the security groups is going to see if it is allowed or not. So coming to the network ACL, as like security group, we can define the rules to allow the traffic. But in addition to allow, we can also specify the deny rules. So if I go to the network ACL, so this is the network ACL associated to this public subnet. I can either click this network ACL here, or even I can go to the network ACL from here also. Under security, there's a network ACL. So now I'm just going to click the network ACL here. So here, if I click this network ACL, we see the inbound rules and outbound rules. So inbound rules is what traffic we are allowing inbound to our VPC. So currently we are allowing all the traffic from all ports, all protocol, from everywhere, means we are not blocking anything. But in real time, whenever we spin up the resources within a VPC, we have to ensure that we implement the tight security rules. And this security must be implemented at two levels. One is at network ACL level and the other one is at security groups level. And here we are edit, and this is at network level or VPC or subnet level, and security groups is at instance level. So here we can add as number of rules as we can. Like there's going to be like rule numbers 100 and maybe like 100, 101, or I can just say 100, 110, and like we can specify whatever the traffic we want. Like if we want to open the ping port, I'm just going to open all ICMP4, that is ping port, and I can just open from everywhere, and we can specify either allow or deny. So I'm allowing this one, and just so allow or deny, we can select either allow or delay and just save. So we can restrict the traffic. Like if we are having the web application and if we want to allow only port 80 to the outside public, means anyone can connect to these instances within this network, but everyone has to connect only through port 80, that is by using HTTP. So in that case, what we should do is we have to edit the rule, and here instead of all traffic we have to specify the HTTP, that is on port 80, and allow from everyone, hello from everywhere. And if you want to RDP, if you want to open the RDP or SSH port, if it is the Linux environment, we have to open the SSH port, and if it is the Windows environment, we have to open the RDP port. And if you want to open either SSH or RDP only from within our corporate network, we can specify the same rule here. We can add a new rule. We can say like the port either SSH or HTTP, and here under the source, instead of specifying 0.0.0.0, we are going to specify our corporate network range. Means if we do that, what happens is like only from within the corporate network we can SSH into that instance, but anyone who is trying to open through HTTP protocol on the browser, they can do it from anywhere in the world. So this is how we can define the security within the network ACL. And network ACL is at the VPC level, and security group is at the instance level, but both are going to perform the similar task to block or allow the traffic. So this is about the security, this is about the network ACL. Okay, so we created the network ACL, we configured the network ACL, and I'm going back to the subnets. So now we have public subnet and the private subnet. So public subnet, we are routing the traffic through internet gateway, and private subnet we are not adding any additional routes. And so here for the subnet there is going to be one more property. I'm going to the subnet actions, and here there's going to be a property called as like modify auto assign IP settings. So I'm just going to click here, and here we have an option to check enable auto assign public IPv4 address. So usually what we need is whenever we create a public subnet, so all the EC2 instances which are created within that public subnet should have a public IP address. Because even if it is in the public subnet and if we don't have the public IP address, we cannot connect to that system from the outside world. So if you want to have an internet access to an EC2 instance, there should be two things. One is we should have an internet gateway attached and the routing role should be added, and it also should have the public IP address, because without public IP address we cannot connect to that system. So here what we did is we created an internet gateway and we attached the internet gateway to the subnet VPC. And next thing is what we should do is we have to select this option to auto assign the public IP address. So if we do this, what happens is like whenever we create a new EC2 resources within this public subnet, these resources are going to have an auto assigned public IP address, and click save. So that's it about the VPC. We created a VPC and we created the subnets. Now we can start using our own VPCs. So whenever we create any EC2 instances within this, we can use our own VPC, and instead of using the default VPC, instead of creating the resources within the default VPCs, we can create our own EC2 instances within the newly created VPC. And that's it for now. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next session.